A white judge humiliates a black woman in his courtroom, mocking her in front of everyone, convinced he's untouchable. But just 3 minutes later, the entire room is in shock, because everything is about to change. His smirk fades, his power slips away, and the woman he tried to break is now the one holding all the cards. What happens next leaves the entire courtroom speechless. What did she do? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Naomi Brooks stood in the courthouse bathroom, her dark hands gripping the cold porcelain of the sink as she studied her reflection in the mirror. Her navy blazer sat perfectly on her shoulders. Not a wrinkle in sight, but she adjusted it anyway. The familiar motion helped steady her nerves. This wasn't just another day defending the innocent. This was the culmination of months of careful planning and investigation. Her target? Judge Walter Crane, a man who had sent too many young black men to prison on flimsy evidence. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she leaned closer to the mirror, checking her appearance one final time. Her braids were neatly pulled back into a bun, her makeup subtle but professional. Everything had to be perfect today. She couldn't give Crane any excuse to find fault with her. "You've got this," she whispered to her reflection, drawing strength from the determination she saw in her own brown eyes. The weight of her FBI badge, hidden beneath her blazer, pressed against her side like a secret armor. Taking one last deep breath, Naomi pushed open the heavy bathroom door and strode into the hallway. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she made her way to courtroom 3B. Each step brought her closer to the trap she had so carefully set. Inside the courtroom, the morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden benches. Jamal Turner sat at the defense table, his 17-year-old frame swimming in an ill-fitting suit borrowed from his uncle. His shoulders were hunched, hands clasped tightly in his lap, eyes fixed on the scratched surface of the table. "It's going to be okay," Naomi murmured as she took her seat beside him. The boy barely nodded, but she saw his hands tremble. The gallery behind them was filling up. Jamal's mother sat in the front row, her Bible clutched to her chest like a shield. The rest of the seats were occupied mainly by white faces, regular courthouse staff, a few reporters, and what Naomi recognized as Crane's carefully selected audience. "All rise." The bailiff's voice boomed through the room, the Honorable Judge Walter Crane presiding. Crane swept in, his black robes billowing behind him. At 65, his hair had gone completely white, but his face remained sharp and alert, his blue eyes cold as they swept over the courtroom. He took his seat with the air of a king ascending his throne. "Be seated," he commanded, his gaze lingering disapprovingly on Naomi before shifting to the case file before him. State versus Turner. Armed robbery, first degree. The trial proceeded exactly as Naomi had expected, which was to say, it was a complete mockery of justice. The prosecution presented their case first, built entirely on a police report full of inconsistencies and a witness statement that changed with each telling. When Naomi stood to cross-examine the arresting officer, Crane's interference began. "Officer Matthews," she started, "you stated in your report that the suspect was wearing a red hoodie, but surveillance footage clearly shows—" "Objection, Your Honor," the prosecutor interrupted. "Counsel is leading the witness." "Sustained," Crane drawled, not even bothering to hide his smirk. "Ms. Brooks, please stick to appropriate questioning." Naomi kept her face neutral, though her jaw tightened. "Officer Matthews, what was the suspect wearing that night?" "A red hoodie, like I said in my report. And how do you explain the surveillance footage that shows—" "Ms. Brooks," Crane cut in, his voice sharp, "I've already ruled on this line of questioning. Move on." In the jury box, most of the jurors weren't even pretending to pay attention. One woman was examining her nails, while an elderly man appeared to be dozing. Naomi had investigated each of them, all hand-picked by Crane through his network of corrupted court officials. The morning dragged on, with each of Naomi's attempts to present evidence met with immediate opposition. When she tried to introduce the alibi witnesses, 3 teachers who could place Jamal at school during the time of the robbery, Crane declared their testimony irrelevant to the immediate facts of the case. During the lunch recess, Naomi found Jamal in the conference room, his head in his hands. "They're not even listening," he whispered. "They already decided I'm guilty." "I know," Naomi said softly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." The afternoon session was worse. The prosecutor's closing argument was full of racist dog whistles about urban youth and taking back our streets. When Naomi stood for her closing, Crane interrupted her every other sentence. "Your Honor, the evidence clearly showed—" "The jury understands the evidence, Ms. Brooks. Wrap it up." "But the witness statements contradict—" "Final warning, counselor." Finally, Crane turned to the jury. "You have heard the evidence. You will now deliberate and—" The jury foreman stood up. "We've already reached a verdict, Your Honor." Naomi's heart sank, though she'd known this was coming. Beside her, Jamal started to shake. "Guilty as charged," the foreman announced, not even bothering to look at Jamal. Crane's face split into a satisfied smile as he lifted his gavel. "The defendant will rise." Jamal stood on trembling legs. Behind them, his mother let out a sob. "Given the serious nature of this crime," Crane intoned, clearly savoring every word, "this court sentences you to the maximum penalty allowed by law." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom. Case dismissed. Two court officers immediately moved toward Jamal. His mother cried out, "No, please, my baby." Naomi watched as they handcuffed her young client, her fists clenched so tight under the table that her nails dug into her palms. But she didn't speak, didn't object. Simply watched as Crane leaned back in his chair, a look of smug satisfaction on his face as he observed the scene before him like a king enjoying his favorite entertainment. He had no idea what was coming next. The courtroom buzzed with the usual post-verdict activities. Clerks shuffled papers, lawyers gathered their belongings, and spectators began filing out. Judge Crane remained on his bench, barely glancing at the stack of files before him as he prepared for the next case on his docket. His self-satisfied expression hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened into something almost smug as he basked in his latest display of power. But Naomi Brooks hadn't moved. She stood perfectly still at the defense table, her posture straight and unwavering. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the quiet determination in her eyes. Her hand moved deliberately to her briefcase, unlatching it with a soft click that somehow seemed to echo in the large room. A strange tension began to build in the air. Those who had been heading for the exits slowed their steps, turning back as if pulled by an invisible force. The usual post-trial chatter died down, replaced by an expectant hush that spread through the courtroom like a wave. Naomi's hand emerged from her briefcase, and in it gleamed a golden badge. The federal emblem caught the light, sending bright reflections dancing across the wooden panels of the judge's bench. Several gasps broke the silence as recognition dawned on those closest to her. Crane was still shuffling his papers, his attention focused on his next case, when the bailiff's voice rang out. "Docket number 47,293, State versus—" "Actually, Your Honor," Naomi's clear, strong voice cut through the announcement, "I think we need to address something more pressing." Her words carried easily in the now silent courtroom, commanding attention from every corner. She reached into her briefcase again, this time producing an official document. The paper was crisp and formal, bearing the unmistakable seal of a federal court. "I have here an arrest warrant, signed by Federal Judge Marion Hayes." Crane's head snapped up, his smirk faltering as he finally gave Naomi his full attention. His eyes narrowed as they fixed on the badge in her hand, confusion replacing his usual arrogant expression. "My name is Special Investigator Naomi Brooks," she continued, her voice steady and professional, "with the Federal Bureau of Judicial Oversight." The reaction in the courtroom was immediate and electric. Shocked murmurs erupted from every corner. Several lawyers who had been packing up their briefcases straightened, their faces displaying various degrees of surprise and concern. Others began whispering urgently to their colleagues, their eyes darting between Naomi and Judge Crane. Two men in dark suits appeared in the doorway, their presence commanding and purposeful as they moved into the courtroom. Their badges were clearly visible on their belts, and their expressions were grimly professional as they made their way toward the bench. "Judge Walter Crane," Naomi's voice rang out clearly. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and judicial misconduct." The color drained from Crane's face before flooding back in a rush of angry red. His hands gripped the edge of his bench, knuckles turning white with the force of his grip. The veneer of judicial dignity cracked completely as rage contorted his features. "This is ridiculous," he bellowed, rising from his seat with such force that his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "You have no right to do this in my courtroom." Spittle flew from his mouth as he shouted, his face growing redder by the second. Naomi took several measured steps forward, her heels clicking against the floor in the sudden silence that followed Crane's outburst. When she reached the bench, she leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a level that only he could hear. "This was never your courtroom, Crane," she said softly, her words carrying the weight of justice long delayed. "You just abused it for too long." The two federal agents had reached the bench now, flanking Naomi on either side. The larger of the two produced a pair of handcuffs, the metal catching the light just as Naomi's badge had moments before. The sound of their approach seemed to finally penetrate Crane's rage, and his eyes darted between them like a cornered animal. In the gallery, every person sat frozen, watching the scene unfold with rapt attention. The reporters who had been dozing through the earlier proceedings were now furiously scribbling notes or typing on their phones. The court clerk had stopped mid-motion, a file still suspended in her hands as she stared open-mouthed at the unfolding scene. Most telling of all was the reaction of the courthouse regulars, the lawyers and staff who had worked under Crane for years. Not a single one moved to defend him. Instead, they watched with expressions that ranged from shock to something that looked remarkably like relief. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the hushed courtroom as the federal agents secured them around Judge Crane's wrists. His judicial robes, once a symbol of authority, now hung awkwardly from his shoulders as he was guided away from the bench. The sound seemed to break the spell of shocked silence that had fallen over the room. Suddenly, the courtroom erupted into controlled chaos. Reporters who had been slouching in the back rows scrambled to their feet, phones raised high. The soft blue glow of dozens of screens illuminated their eager faces as they captured every moment. Camera shutters clicked rapidly, creating a staccato rhythm that punctuated the growing murmurs of the crowd. Naomi stood calmly in the center of the storm, her posture relaxed but purposeful. She turned toward the side wall of the courtroom, where a large white screen had been discreetly installed the night before. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she moved, the sound drawing all eyes to her. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the senior judge who had just entered the courtroom to handle the situation. "With your permission, I'd like to show everyone exactly what we found during our investigation." At his grave nod, she produced a small remote from her briefcase. The mechanical whir of the projection screen lowering filled the room. The sound seemed to build anticipation, and several people leaned forward in their seats. Even the journalists lowered their phones momentarily, not wanting to miss what was coming next. Naomi clicked the remote, and the screen flickered to life. The first image showed Crane in his chambers, his face clearly visible as he lounged in his leather chair. The timestamp in the corner showed a date from just 3 months ago. When his voice filled the courtroom through the speakers, it was casual, almost lazy, the voice of a man who never expected to be caught. "Black defendants?" the recorded Crane chuckled, waving his hand dismissively. "I don't even read their case files. They're all guilty." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Several people stood up, their faces twisted with disgust. One of the court reporters, an elderly black woman who had worked there for decades, pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. But Naomi wasn't done. She clicked to the next recording. This time, Crane was speaking to someone off camera, his voice more businesslike but no less damning. "Make sure this one gets a maximum sentence. The private prison contracts pay better when their cells stay full." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. A young law clerk in the front row was frantically taking notes, his face pale with shock. Several attorneys exchanged knowing looks, pieces of a puzzle they'd suspected but could never prove finally falling into place. Naomi paused for a moment, letting the weight of these revelations sink in. Then she clicked the remote one final time. The last video was grainier than the others, clearly from a surveillance camera. It showed Crane's chambers from a high angle, capturing the judge seated at his desk. A man in an expensive suit approached him, pulling something from his briefcase. Even in the poor quality of the footage, there was no mistaking the thick envelope that changed hands. Naomi froze the frame at the exact moment of the exchange, the envelope clearly visible between their hands. "That," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, "is the prosecutor who just handled Jamal Turner's case." She turned in a slow circle, meeting the eyes of those around her. Judge Crane wasn't just biased, he was bought. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a cough, not a whisper, not even the rustle of paper disturbed the heavy stillness. Every person in the courtroom seemed to be holding their breath, processing the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. The loyal clerks who had defended Crane for years now stared at their former boss with undisguised horror. His longtime staff members, who had always explained away his harsh sentences as tough love or maintaining order, couldn't look him in the eye. The other judges who had gathered at the commotion stood rigid, their faces masks of professional shock and personal betrayal. The federal agents tightened their grip on Crane's arms, though he hardly seemed to notice. The man who had ruled this courtroom with an iron fist just hours before now looked small and pale, his expensive robes hanging limply from his trembling shoulders. In the press section, a veteran journalist with graying temples leaned over to his colleague. "This is the biggest scandal in judicial history," he muttered, his voice carrying in the silence. The words seemed to echo off the high ceiling, a verbal epitaph for Crane's career and reputation. Crane's eyes darted around the courtroom, searching desperately for a friendly face, an ally, anyone who might speak up in his defense. But he found nothing. The power he had wielded so carelessly, the authority he had abused for so long had evaporated in an instant. His gaze finally settled on Naomi, and for the first time, real fear showed in his eyes. The crowd watched as the man who had decided the fates of thousands now faced his own judgment. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The judge who had shown no mercy would now have to ask for it himself. His hands, now bound by the same system he had corrupted, shook visibly against the dark metal of the handcuffs. The heavy doors of the courtroom swung shut behind Judge Crane and his federal escorts, their footsteps fading down the marble hallway. The echo of his departure seemed to break a spell, and the gathered crowd began to shift and murmur, their voices rising as they processed what they had just witnessed. But Naomi's attention had already turned elsewhere. Her eyes found Jamal Turner, still standing in the defendant's area, his wrists bound in cold metal handcuffs. The young man's face showed a mix of confusion and cautious hope, his usual quiet demeanor struggling to process the dramatic turn of events. Beside him, his mother, Mrs. Turner, gripped his arm as if afraid he might disappear. Tears streamed down her face, leaving dark spots on her worn but carefully pressed blouse. Mrs. Turner's fingers dug into the fabric of Jamal's orange jumpsuit, her eyes meeting Naomi's with a desperate question in them. She opened her mouth to speak but couldn't form words through her emotion. Instead, she just held tighter to her son, her body trembling with the weight of possibilities she barely dared to consider. Naomi's heels clicked purposefully across the courtroom floor as she approached the judge's bench. The massive wooden structure loomed before her, still radiating the authority it had held moments ago when Crane sat there passing his corrupt judgments. Without hesitation, she climbed the 3 steps to the platform. Crane's leather chair still held the impression of his presence, and his personal items lay scattered across the desk. A half-empty coffee mug, a stack of case files he would never rule on, and the heavy gavel he had used to destroy so many lives. Naomi reached for the gavel, feeling its weight in her hand. The polished wood felt warm, as if it still held the heat of Crane's angry grip from earlier. She turned to face the courtroom, her eyes finding the bailiff who stood frozen in uncertainty. The man's usual stoic expression had cracked, revealing the confusion beneath. His hand rested nervously on his belt as he glanced between Naomi and the 2 officers who still flanked Jamal, waiting for direction. "I think we need to correct something," Naomi announced, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. She stepped forward, the gavel firm in her grip. The authority in her tone drew all eyes to her, and the scattered conversations died away. In light of the evidence just presented regarding Judge Crane's corruption, I am formally reopening the case of Jamal Turner. She paused, letting the words settle over the crowd. The proof of judicial misconduct, bribery, and racial bias creates clear grounds for an immediate dismissal of all charges. The officers standing near Jamal shifted uncomfortably, their hands still hovering near their weapons out of habit. They exchanged uncertain glances, their training warring with the unprecedented situation before them. Naomi's voice cut through their hesitation. "Uncuff him," she ordered, the words ringing with unmistakable authority. When they didn't move immediately, she added, "Now." The older of the two officers moved first, pulling his keys from his belt. The metallic jingle seemed unusually loud in the quiet courtroom as he approached Jamal. The young man held perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe as the officer reached for his wrists. The handcuffs opened with a click that seemed to release more than just metal restraints. As they fell away, Mrs. Turner let out a sob that had been building since Crane's arrest. She threw her arms around her son, pulling him close with the desperate strength of a mother who had almost lost her child to injustice. "My baby," she cried, her words muffled against his chest. "My baby boy." Her tears flowed freely now, soaking into the rough orange fabric of the jumpsuit he would never have to wear again. Jamal wrapped his arms around his mother, his own eyes glistening. His usual quiet reserve cracked, and his shoulders shook with emotion as he held her. The two clung to each other, swaying slightly as they absorbed the reality that their nightmare was ending. After a moment, Jamal lifted his head and looked at Naomi. His eyes, still bright with tears, held a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "You saved me," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. Naomi shook her head, stepping down from the judge's platform to stand before them. "No," she replied firmly. "I just did what should have been done from the beginning." Her words carried clearly through the courtroom, where everyone had fallen silent to watch this moment of justice finally served. She turned to face the gathered crowd, the reporters still recording every moment, the lawyers reassessing their own cases in light of these revelations, the court staff coming to terms with their unwitting role in Crane's corruption. The weight of the moment settled over them all like a heavy blanket, the realization dawning that this was just the first thread pulled in a tapestry of injustice. "And we're just getting started," Naomi declared, her voice carrying the promise of more truth, more justice, and more changes to come. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters jumped from their seats, their voices rising over each other as they shouted questions. Camera flashes lit up the room like lightning, capturing every detail of this historic moment. "Special Investigator Brooks, what led to this investigation? How long has Judge Crane been under surveillance? Are there other judges involved? What happens to all the cases Crane presided over?" The questions came rapid fire, but Naomi maintained her composure, standing tall at the front of the courtroom. Her face remained neutral, professional, even as the chaos swirled around her. She had expected this reaction, had prepared for it, but the reality was still overwhelming. Court clerks huddled in small groups, their faces pale and drawn as they whispered among themselves. Some frantically shuffled through papers, perhaps searching for signs they had missed in Crane's cases. Others simply stood frozen, their expressions shell-shocked as they processed the magnitude of what had just happened. The lawyers present showed varying reactions. Some looked genuinely horrified by the revelations, their faces reflecting the shame of having participated in Crane's corrupt court, however unwittingly. Others, though, Naomi noted with interest, seemed more nervous than surprised. These were the ones exchanging quick, worried glances, their eyes darting between each other and the exit. They reminded her of rats considering whether to abandon ship. Naomi's attention shifted as she spotted a young public defender she recognized. The woman was sitting alone, tears streaming down her face. Naomi knew that look. It was the face of someone remembering all the cases she'd lost in Crane's courtroom, all the clients she'd failed to defend against a system rigged against them. Through the commotion, Naomi made her way to where Jamal and his mother still stood, their arms wrapped around each other. Mrs. Turner's tears had slowed, but her grip on her son hadn't loosened. Jamal's orange jumpsuit stood out starkly against his mother's floral dress, a visual reminder of how close he'd come to having his life destroyed. "Mrs. Turner," Naomi said gently, touching the woman's shoulder, "I want you to know that we're going to make this right. All of it." She pulled a business card from her pocket and pressed it into Mrs. Turner's hand. "My team will be in touch about the formal dismissal of charges. We'll make sure Jamal's record is completely cleared." Mrs. Turner nodded, seemingly unable to speak. Jamal, however, looked at Naomi with clear eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, but the words carried the weight of a life saved. Before Naomi could respond, a shadow fell across them. She turned to find Senior Court Officer Davidson standing there, his face tight with tension. Davidson had been in this courthouse for over 20 years. Everyone knew him, trusted him, but now his usual friendly demeanor was replaced with something darker. "You don't understand what you've started," he said in a low voice, his eyes darting around the crowded courtroom. His hand rested on his service weapon, though Naomi doubted he was aware of the gesture. Crane wasn't the only one. Naomi straightened to her full height, meeting Davidson's gaze steadily. She could see the fear in his eyes, but also something else. Perhaps relief that someone had finally acted. "Good," she replied, her voice firm and clear. "Then we'll be taking more of them down." Davidson opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, Naomi's phone buzzed in her pocket. The vibration seemed to travel up her spine, setting off warning bells in her mind. She recognized the number immediately, her primary contact at the bureau. Stepping away from the group, she answered the call. "Brooks." "Get out of there," the voice on the other end said without preamble. The urgency in the tone made Naomi's stomach tighten. "Now, there's more resistance than we expected." Naomi's eyes scanned the courtroom, suddenly seeing the chaos in a new light. How many people in this room were already making calls, warning others? How many were destroying evidence at this very moment? "Understood," she replied quietly, ending the call. She turned back to Jamal and his mother. "I have to go now, but my team will be in touch very soon. Stay safe." Mrs. Turner nodded, clutching Naomi's card like a lifeline. Jamal's expression showed understanding beyond his years. He knew this wasn't over. Naomi made her way through the crowd, politely but firmly brushing off reporters' questions. The noise of the courtroom faded as she pushed through the heavy doors and strode down the marble hallway. Her heels clicked against the floor, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. As she emerged from the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, movement caught her eye. A black SUV with deeply tinted windows pulled up to the curb, its engine purring quietly. The vehicle was expensive, official-looking, the kind used by high-ranking government officials. Through the front windshield, Naomi could see the driver was wearing a dark suit and sunglasses. But it was the passenger in the back seat who drew her attention. The window rolled down just enough to reveal a man in an impeccably tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. She recognized him immediately. Justice William Montgomery, one of the most powerful figures in the state's judicial system. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Montgomery's gaze was cold, calculating, assessing her with the same careful attention he might give to a legal brief. There was no fear in his expression, no concern about Crane's arrest. Instead, she saw something that chilled her more: quiet confidence, as if this was merely the opening move in a much larger game. The window rolled up smoothly, and the SUV pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into traffic. Naomi felt a chill run through her body despite the warm afternoon sun. The message in Montgomery's presence was clear. This battle was far from over. Hours later, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead in Naomi's temporary office, casting a harsh glow on the mountain of case files spread across her desk. Each manila folder represented a life affected by Judge Crane's corruption, hundreds of cases spanning his 15-year tenure on the bench. The sheer volume was staggering. Naomi picked up one file, her fingers tracing the name on the tab: Marcus Washington, age 19. Inside, she found the familiar pattern: a minor drug offense turned into a maximum sentence, no consideration for the defendant's clean record or college acceptance. The prosecution's case had been weak, built entirely on circumstantial evidence. Yet Crane had blocked every reasonable defense motion. "How many more?" she muttered, reaching for another file. Her small team had worked tirelessly for months, building their case against Crane piece by piece. Special Agent Thompson, her tech expert, had painstakingly recovered deleted emails and bank records. Agent Rodriguez had interviewed dozens of former defendants and their families, documenting patterns of discrimination and misconduct. The evidence was solid, ironclad even, but Naomi knew better than to celebrate too early. The justice system was like a spider web. Pull one thread, and the whole structure vibrates, alerting every spider in the vicinity. Crane wasn't just any judge, he was part of a network, a system that protected its own. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she took a sip anyway, grimacing at the bitter taste. The wall clock showed 7:45 p.m. Most of the building had cleared out, leaving her alone with the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the weight of what was to come. A sharp ring cut through the silence, making her jump. Her phone's screen showed an unknown number. Naomi hesitated for a moment before answering, her guard immediately up. "Agent Brooks speaking." "Agent Brooks." The voice was smooth, professional, a lawyer's voice. "This is Charles Whitman, representing Judge Walter Crane." Naomi's back straightened. Whitman was one of the city's most expensive defense attorneys, known for representing corrupt officials and winning impossible cases. His involvement confirmed her suspicions about the network protecting Crane. "What can I do for you, Mr. Whitman?" "Drop this, Agent Brooks." The smoothness in his voice hardened to steel. "This isn't just about Crane. You're pulling at threads that hold up the whole damn system. Walk away." Naomi's grip tightened on her phone. "Is that a threat, Mr. Whitman?" Considerate friendly advice from someone who understands how things work. Judge Crane made mistakes, yes, but pursuing this further won't end well, for anyone. "I appreciate your concern," Naomi replied, keeping her voice steady, "but I think I'll take my chances with the evidence." "Evidence can be interpreted many ways, Agent Brooks, remember that." The line went dead before she could respond. Naomi set her phone down slowly, her mind racing. The call wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration of war. As if on cue, her computer chimed with a news alert. The headline made her blood run cold. "Controversial FBI investigation raises questions about judicial independence." The article appeared on a major news site, complete with quotes from anonymous legal experts questioning her methods. They painted her as a rogue agent, suggesting she had orchestrated an elaborate entrapment scheme against a respected judge. Her phone buzzed again, this time with text messages from her team. The story was everywhere, spreading across multiple platforms. Each outlet seemed to have its own anonymous source, each more damaging than the last. Agent Brooks's history of aggressive tactics. Sources questioned the legitimacy of evidence. Former colleagues expressed concern over investigators' judgment. The coordination was impressive. They had prepared for this, probably had the stories ready to go the moment Crane was arrested. Every quote, every expert opinion, was carefully crafted to sow doubt about her investigation. One article even dug into her past cases as a public defender, twisting her passionate advocacy for clients into evidence of an anti-judicial agenda. They quoted her own words from old court transcripts, stripped of context and rearranged to paint her as biased and unprofessional. Her phone rang again. This time it was her boss, Deputy Director Marcus. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen this playbook before. "They're trying to discredit you," he said without preamble. "Be ready. This will get worse before it gets better." Naomi closed her eyes, letting out a slow breath. "I expected resistance," she admitted, "but I didn't expect them to move this fast." "They're scared," Marcus replied. "You rattled more than just Crane's cage today. The whole network is in panic mode. The stories they're running are coordinated hits. Yes, they'll try to bury you in bad press, make you look like a loose cannon. It's standard procedure when they can't attack the evidence directly." Naomi glanced at the case files on her desk, at all the lives affected by Crane's corruption. "What's our next move?" "For now, no comments to the press. Let them run their stories. We stick to the evidence. Let it speak for itself. That's what they're really afraid of." After hanging up, Naomi sat in the quiet of her office watching the news alerts continue to roll in. Each one seemed more outrageous than the last, but she forced herself to read them all. She needed to know exactly what she was up against. The smear campaign was thorough, professional, the kind of operation that required resources and connections. They weren't just trying to discredit her investigation. They were trying to destroy her credibility completely, make her toxic to any future cases. But as she looked at the case files spread across her desk, Naomi felt her resolve strengthen. Each folder represented someone who had faced Crane's corrupted version of justice, someone who had lost years of their life, their future, their hope, someone who deserved better. The next day, the morning sun filtered through dusty blinds in an abandoned office building on the outskirts of town. Naomi had chosen this location carefully. A foreclosed real estate office, far from the courthouse and any potential surveillance. Her team sat around a makeshift conference table, Special Agent Thompson with his laptop, Agent Rodriguez reviewing files, and 2 other trusted agents manning the perimeter. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made everyone tense. Rodriguez's hand moved to his weapon, but Naomi held up a hand. The knock came in the predetermined pattern. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slow. A woman entered, mid-30s, wearing a plain brown suit and carrying a worn leather briefcase. Sarah Mitchell had worked as Judge Crane's clerk for 5 years before quietly resigning 6 months ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her briefcase. "Thank you for coming," Naomi said, gesturing to an empty chair. "We understand the risk you're taking." Sarah's eyes darted around the room before settling on Naomi. "After what you did in that courtroom, I couldn't stay silent anymore. But you need to understand, Crane was just the front man. The real power is higher up." Thompson started recording as Sarah opened her briefcase. She pulled out a stack of papers, court records, transcripts, and what appeared to be private correspondence. "I started noticing patterns about 3 years ago," Sarah explained, spreading the documents across the table. "Every black defendant who came before Crane got maximum sentences regardless of circumstances. But it wasn't just him. Other judges were doing the same thing." Rodriguez leaned forward. "How many judges are we talking about?" "At least 7 in this district alone, plus prosecutors, police chiefs, even some public defenders who were paid to throw cases." Sarah's voice shook. "It's a system. They call it maintaining order. But it's about money. Private prison contracts." Naomi picked up one of the documents, a spreadsheet showing inmate quotas and corresponding payments. The numbers made her stomach turn. They were getting kickbacks based on prison occupancy rates. Sarah nodded. The more cells they filled, the more money everyone got. Judge Crane bragged about it once when he was drunk at a holiday party. Called it a win-win. They got paid, and those people stayed where they belonged. The disgust in her voice was palpable. As Naomi and her team went through the documents, a pattern emerged. The corruption wasn't random or opportunistic. It was organized, methodical. Certain judges were assigned specific types of cases. Prosecutors were instructed which charges to pursue. Even jury selection was manipulated to ensure the desired outcomes. "But who coordinates all this?" Thompson asked, typing rapidly on his laptop. "Someone has to be at the top." Sarah's face paled. "I only saw him once in Crane's chambers. They didn't know I was there. I came back late to get my phone. He was different from the others. Colder, more controlled. They all answered to him." Naomi felt her pulse quicken. This man, was he tall, silver hair, expensive suit, moves like he owns every room he's in? "Yes." Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "Judge Emery Blackwell, head of the State Judicial Ethics Board." The room went silent. Naomi remembered the black SUV outside the courthouse, the calculating eyes that had watched her. Everything clicked into place. Blackwell's position on the ethics board gave him perfect cover. He could protect corrupt judges while targeting anyone who threatened to expose them. "That's why no internal investigations ever went anywhere," Rodriguez said. "He was in charge of investigating himself." Thompson pulled up Blackwell's records on his laptop. "Look at this." Every judge he's cleared of misconduct has a connection to private prison companies. Campaign donations, consulting fees, speaking engagements. He's the architect, Naomi said, studying the web of connections. The whole operation runs through him. If we can prove his involvement. The entire network collapses, Rodriguez finished. Sarah clutched her purse tightly. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Blackwell isn't just powerful, he's ruthless. People who cross him tend to disappear, or worse. We can protect you, Naomi assured her. Your testimony combined with these documents? Her phone buzzed, cutting her off. An unknown number. The message made her blood run cold. You're in over your head. Walk away or you won't get another warning. Sarah saw the text and stood up so quickly her chair toppled backward. They know. Oh God, they know I'm here. Her face had gone chalk white. Naomi showed the message to her team. Rodriguez immediately moved to secure the perimeter while Thompson began tracing the number. The morning sun that had seemed so promising now felt exposed, dangerous. Someone was watching them, waiting to see what they would do next. The documents on the table, evidence of years of systematic racism and corruption, seemed to carry more weight now. Each page represented not just crimes, but the power of those willing to protect them. And at the center of it all sat Judge Emery Blackwell, a man who had spent decades building an empire of injustice. Sarah's hands shook as she gathered her things. What are you going to do? Naomi looked at the threatening message again, then at her team, dedicated agents who had risked everything to expose the truth. She thought of Jamal Turner and countless others who had faced Blackwell's corrupted version of justice. The choice was clear, even if the path forward was dangerous. But before she could respond, another text came through from the same unknown number. This one made the threat even clearer. Attached was a photo of Naomi entering the building that morning. They weren't just watching, they were close by. The fluorescent lights of the parking garage flickered overhead, casting alternating patterns of light and shadow across the concrete floor. Naomi's footsteps echoed in the empty space as she walked toward her car, her heels clicking against the cold surface. The events of the day, the whistleblower's revelations, the threatening messages, the photo of her entering the building, had left her exhausted but hyper-aware. She adjusted the strap of her briefcase, keeping her free hand close to the concealed weapon at her hip. Years of FBI training had honed her instincts, and right now, every one of them was screaming danger. The garage seemed too quiet, too still, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. Between the rows of parked cars, shadows stretched like dark fingers across her path. Naomi's eyes scanned each vehicle she passed, each concrete pillar, each darkened corner. She noticed small details, a slight movement behind a van, the reflection of movement in a car's side mirror. Someone was there trying to stay hidden, matching her pace. The distance to her car felt longer than usual. Naomi maintained her steady pace, refusing to show any sign that she'd detected the presence following her. Her car was parked in a relatively open area, a tactical choice she always made, ensuring clear sightlines in all directions. But tonight, that exposed position felt like a double-edged sword. As she approached her vehicle, she could hear the subtle shuffle of footsteps trying to move silently. They were getting closer. Naomi pulled her keys from her pocket, the familiar weight offering little comfort. The garage's dim lighting cast her shadow ahead of her, and in its stretched darkness, she caught the movement of another figure's shadow merging with hers. Naomi reached for her car door, her movements deliberately slow. The metal handle was cool against her fingers as she wrapped them around it. That's when she heard it, the quick scuff of shoes against concrete coming fast from her left. A figure in a dark hoodie emerged from behind a nearby SUV, lunging toward her with practiced efficiency. But Naomi was ready. Years of training kicked in automatically. She shifted her weight, pivoting away from the attack while simultaneously grabbing the assailant's extended wrist. Using his own momentum against him, she pulled him forward and slammed him hard against her car's door. The impact rattled the vehicle. The man grunted in pain but tried to push back. Naomi maintained her grip on his wrist, twisting it up behind his back in a practiced hold. He struggled, but she increased the pressure, forcing him down. His knees hit the concrete as he gasped in pain. "Who sent you?" Naomi demanded, maintaining the pressure point hold. The man's breath came in sharp bursts. "This isn't about you," he managed to say through gritted teeth. "It's bigger than you think." Before Naomi could press him further, movement caught her eye. A second figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar about 20 feet away. The garage's fluorescent lighting glinted off the metal in his hand. A pistol, aimed directly at her. The sound of the gunshot exploded through the garage, the echo bouncing off concrete walls and ceiling. Naomi released her hold on the first attacker and dove behind her car door just as the bullet slammed into it, the impact sending vibrations through the metal. The first attacker scrambled to his feet and ran. More shots rang out, each one hitting her car with deadly accuracy. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Naomi stayed low, using her car as cover. She drew her own weapon but held her fire. The echoes and shadows made it impossible to get a clear shot without exposing herself. Footsteps pounded against concrete, multiple sets running hard and fast. The sound grew fainter as her attackers retreated into the darkness of the garage. Soon, only the fading echoes remained, along with the acrid smell of gunpowder hanging in the air. Naomi waited another full minute, her weapon ready, before slowly standing. Her heart hammered in her chest as she surveyed the scene. 3 bullet holes marred her car door, the metal torn and twisted where the rounds had impacted. If she had been a fraction of a second slower, this wasn't just intimidation anymore. The threatening texts, the surveillance photo, and now this. They were escalating. The corruption she was fighting had just crossed a line from legal threats to attempted murder. With steady hands, Naomi pulled out her phone. She dialed her team's secure line, her eyes still scanning the garage for any remaining threats. When the line connected, she spoke just one word, her voice hard with determination. War. The next day, the morning sun filtered through the high windows of the FBI field office, casting long shadows across Naomi's car. She sat on a metal folding chair, watching as Agent Chen, their forensic specialist, carefully dusted the bullet hole for prints. The damage looked even worse in daylight, a stark reminder of how close she'd come to death. The hole was clean and precise, about chest height. Professional work. Naomi rubbed her temples, fighting off a headache from lack of sleep. She'd spent most of the night reviewing security footage from the garage, but the attackers had known exactly where the cameras were. They'd kept their faces hidden and left no traces. Miguel Soto walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Naomi, his expression grim as he studied the bullet hole. "This isn't just intimidation," he said, his voice low and serious. "They want you gone." Naomi took a sip of the coffee, grateful for its warmth. "They're scared," she replied. "We're getting close to something big." "That's what worries me." Miguel pulled up another chair, sitting beside her. "These people, they don't make mistakes. They don't leave loose ends." He gestured toward the car. "This wasn't a warning shot, Naomi. They were aiming to kill." Agent Chen straightened up, shaking his head. "No prints," he announced. "Not even partials. These guys knew what they were doing." Naomi stood, walking closer to examine the damage herself. Of course not. They're ghosts, hired muscle with no paper trail, probably brought in from out of state. She turned to Miguel. "We need to focus on Blackwell. He's the key to all of this." They moved to the conference room they'd converted into their command center. The walls were covered with photos, documents, and connection maps, a complex web of corruption with Judge Emery Blackwell at its center. Naomi and her team had been building this case piece by piece, uncovering a network that went deeper than anyone had imagined. "Look at this," Miguel said, pointing to a calendar they'd reconstructed from various sources. Off-the-record meetings between judges, prosecutors, and private prison executives, all carefully arranged to avoid official documentation. Naomi leaned in, studying the patterns. Every meeting corresponds with a spike in maximum sentences for Black defendants. She pulled out a stack of case files. "I've been reviewing Blackwell's rulings. The pattern is impossible to ignore." They spent the next hour going through case after case. Each one followed the same template. Black defendants, often young, charged with minimal evidence. Maximum sentences handed down without consideration for circumstances or prior records. The private prisons filled up, and someone's bank account got fatter. "The numbers are staggering," Miguel muttered, running calculations on his laptop. "We're looking at thousands of cases, thousands of innocent people serving maximum terms, all so these bastards could profit." Naomi's phone rang, interrupting their work. The caller ID showed Mrs. Turner, Jamal's mother. Her heart sank as she answered, already sensing bad news. "Mrs. Turner, what's wrong?" The woman's voice trembled on the other end. "Two men came to my house this morning, in suits. They said—" She paused, taking a shaky breath. "They said we need to stay quiet about Jamal's case being overturned. About Judge Crane." Naomi's free hand clenched into a fist. "Did they threaten you?" "They said things could get complicated for Jamal if we don't cooperate, that maybe they'd find new evidence." Mrs. Turner's voice cracked. "I'm scared, Agent Brooks." "Listen to me carefully," Naomi said, keeping her voice calm and steady. "The FBI is watching your house. We have agents nearby. I promise you, nothing will happen to you or Jamal." She made eye contact with Miguel, who was already on his phone, arranging additional surveillance. After reassuring Mrs. Turner and ending the call, Naomi slumped in her chair. The pressure was mounting. These people were targeting witnesses, trying to silence anyone who could testify against them. "We've got agents en route to the Turners," Miguel confirmed. "But we can't protect everyone they might target. We need to move faster." Naomi nodded, turning back to the evidence wall. They had enough to prove the conspiracy, the pattern of corruption, the money trail, the connections between judges and private prisons. But Blackwell himself remained insulated, protected by layers of bureaucracy and loyal subordinates. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. The message was brief, but clear. "You have 72 hours to walk away, or you'll wish you had." She showed the screen to Miguel, her jaw tightening. "They're setting a deadline." Miguel studied the message, his expression darkening. "If they're giving us a timeline, they're planning something big, something they think will stop us permanently." Naomi stared at the text, feeling the weight of everything they'd uncovered. Thousands of lives ruined by corruption, families torn apart for profit, a system designed to prey on the vulnerable, and now, a countdown to whatever Blackwell and his allies had planned. The morning light streamed through the windows of the FBI command center as Naomi and her team huddled around a large table covered in court documents. The pattern had emerged slowly at first, but now it was unmistakable. Every time a case involving potential private prison contracts came up, Judge Blackwell would mysteriously step in for a special review. "Look at this," Miguel said, pointing to a spreadsheet he'd compiled. "In the past year alone, Blackwell has personally intervened in 47 cases. Every single one involved a black defendant, and every single one ended with a maximum sentence." Naomi leaned over his shoulder, studying the numbers. And each time, the private prison corporation involved showed a spike in their quarterly profits. She straightened up, her mind racing. "We need to prove he's actively manipulating these cases." Agent Susan, their tech specialist, spoke up from her computer station. "I think I found something interesting. There's a pattern to how these cases get flagged for review. Someone's accessing the court's scheduling system late at night, usually between 2 and 3 a.m. "That's our window," Naomi said, moving to the evidence board. "We need to create a case file that's too tempting for Blackwell to resist." The team worked through the morning, carefully crafting their trap. They created a fictional case involving a young black college student accused of drug possession. The evidence was flimsy, but the potential sentence was severe. Exactly the kind of case Blackwell typically targeted. "Make sure to include the keywords they look for," Miguel suggested. "Multiple offender status, potential gang affiliations, all the triggers they use to justify maximum sentences." Susan uploaded the fake file into the court system just before midnight. They had embedded invisible tracking code that would alert them the moment anyone accessed it. Now all they could do was wait. The response came faster than they expected. At 2:17 a.m., their monitors lit up with an alert. Someone was accessing the file from a secured terminal in the courthouse. Minutes later, a notification appeared. The case had been reassigned for special review by Judge Emery Blackwell himself. "We got him," Naomi breathed, watching the activity log scroll across the screen. He took the bait. Miguel was already making calls, mobilizing their arrest team. "We'll move at dawn. We'll catch him before he has time to..." Naomi's phone rang, cutting him off. The caller ID showed a restricted number. Her stomach tightened as she answered. "Brooks." The voice on the other end belonged to Agent Thompson, her supervisor. "Naomi, get to the federal courthouse now. Judge Harrison... His voice cracked slightly. "He's dead." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Judge William Harrison had been overseeing their investigation into judicial corruption. He had signed off on their warrants, protected their operation from interference. "What happened?" she managed to ask, though she already knew. "It looks like a break-in gone wrong, but..." Thompson paused. "Just get down here." Naomi and Miguel arrived at the courthouse 20 minutes later. The building was surrounded by police cars, their lights painting the pre-dawn darkness in flashes of red and blue. They found Judge Harrison's body in his chambers, slumped over his desk. The crime scene technicians worked quietly, photographing everything. But Naomi's attention was drawn to a piece of paper placed carefully beside the judge's hand. She pulled on latex gloves and picked it up. The message was typed in plain black letters. "This is your only warning, Brooks." "They knew we were coming," Miguel said softly, reading the note over her shoulder. "They're sending a message." Naomi stared at the judge's body, her hands shaking with a mixture of rage and grief. Harrison had been a good man, one of the few who couldn't be bought. He had believed in justice, in doing what was right regardless of the cost. And now he had paid that cost with his life. The drive back to their office was silent. The sun was rising over the city, but neither of them felt its warmth. As they walked through the parking garage, Miguel finally spoke. "This is spiraling out of control," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "They're not just covering their tracks anymore, Naomi. They're eliminating people." They stopped at her car and Naomi turned to face her partner. Her heart was pounding, but not from fear. If Blackwell and his allies had escalated to murder, it meant one thing. She was closer than ever to exposing them. "We can't back down now," she said firmly. Miguel ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his gesture. "They killed a federal judge, Naomi, in his own chambers. Think about what that means." He met her eyes directly. "You could be next." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. They both knew he was right. Blackwell and his network had just demonstrated how far they were willing to go to protect themselves. No one was safe, not even those at the highest levels of the justice system. Hours later, the sun was setting over the industrial outskirts of the city as Naomi and Miguel's unmarked car pulled up to a weathered apartment complex. The building's faded brick exterior and rusty fire escapes spoke of decades of neglect. This was the kind of place people came to disappear. "You sure this is the address?" Miguel asked, double-checking the file on his tablet. Naomi nodded, her eyes scanning the building. "Peter Langford, living under the name David Martinez. Our analyst confirmed he's been here for the past 3 years." They had spent weeks tracking down the former prosecutor. Langford had vanished shortly after Blackwell's rise to power, leaving behind a promising career and a comfortable life. The official story was that he'd resigned due to health issues, but Naomi's investigation had revealed something else: large deposits to offshore accounts, followed by a complete withdrawal and disappearance. The stairwell smelled of mildew and old cigarettes. Their footsteps echoed as they climbed to the 4th floor. Apartment 4C was at the end of a dimly lit hallway, its door marked with peeling paint. Naomi knocked firmly. "Mr. Martinez? FBI?" Silence. Then the sound of something falling inside. Miguel's hand moved to his weapon. "Mr. Langford," Naomi called out, using his real name. "We know who you are. We're not here to hurt you. We need your help." The door opened a crack held by a security chain. A pale face peered out, a man in his 50s, his hair graying at the temples, eyes wide with fear. "How did you find me?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "We can protect you," Naomi said, holding up her badge, "but we need to talk about Judge Blackwell." The man's face went white at the mention of Blackwell's name. He tried to close the door, but Miguel wedged his foot in the gap. "Judge Harrison is dead," Naomi said quickly. "Murdered in his chambers. We know you left because you saw something big enough to make you run." Langford's hands trembled on the door. "You don't understand. If I talk..." "If you don't," Miguel cut in, "more people will die. We can put you in witness protection. New identity, new location. Somewhere they'll never find you." For a long moment, Langford stood frozen. Then slowly he closed the door. They heard the chain sliding, and the door reopened fully. "Come in," he said. "Quickly." The apartment was small and sparse with minimal furniture and covered windows. Files and newspapers were scattered across a folding table. On the wall, a complex web of photos and notes was connected by red string. Langford had been conducting his own investigation. "I've been gathering evidence," he explained, gesturing to the wall. "Years of it, but I never knew who to trust." "Tell us everything," Naomi said, taking out her recorder. Langford sank into a worn armchair, running his hands through his hair. It started small. Crane would ask for certain cases to be fast-tracked. Specific defendants, always minorities, always with minimal evidence. Then Blackwell got involved. "How?" Miguel pressed. "They had a system. Private prison companies would identify facilities that needed to maintain certain occupancy rates to maximize profits. Blackwell and Crane would ensure those beds were filled." Langford's voice shook. "They started manipulating sentences, extending them in secret judicial reviews. People who should have served months were getting years." Naomi leaned forward. "And the kickbacks? Millions. Through shell companies' offshore accounts, but that wasn't the worst part." Langford stood, pacing nervously. "Some of these people were innocent. Completely innocent. But Blackwell didn't care. He had quotas to fill." "Why didn't you report it?" Miguel asked. Langford laughed bitterly. "To who? Blackwell controlled everything. The ethics board, the judicial review committee, all of it. But..." He hesitated, wringing his hands. "But what?" Naomi pressed. "Blackwell doesn't work alone. There's someone above him, someone bigger." Before Naomi could ask more, the window behind them exploded in a shower of glass. Gunfire filled the air as bullets tore through the apartment. A black SUV had pulled into the alley below, masked figures leaning out with automatic weapons. "Get down!" Miguel shouted, pulling Langford behind a heavy cabinet. Naomi dove behind the couch, drawing her weapon. The gunfire was deafening in the small space. Bullets shredded the wall of evidence, sending papers flying. Naomi reached for her radio, calling for backup as Miguel returned fire through the broken window. "We need to move," Miguel yelled over the chaos. "They'll have men coming up the stairs." They made for the door, keeping low. Langford stumbled between them, his face pale with terror. More shots rang out as they reached the hallway. The stairwell door burst open below. More gunmen were coming up. "Fire escape!" Naomi shouted, pushing them toward the window at the end of the hall. Miguel went first, helping Langford through the opening. They were halfway down when another burst of gunfire erupted from below. Langford jerked violently, red blooming across his shirt. He collapsed against the metal grating. "No." Naomi grabbed him as the SUV peeled away, tires screeching. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Miguel pressed his hands against Langford's chest, but blood seeped between his fingers. "Stay with us. Help is coming." Langford's eyes were wide, his breathing shallow. He grabbed Naomi's wrist with surprising strength. "It's bigger than you think," he gasped. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. "The governor. It's the governor." His grip loosened. His eyes went blank. Peter Langford, the man who might have blown the whole case wide open, was dead. Naomi stared at his body, the implications of his last words hitting her like a physical blow. If the corruption reached all the way to the governor's office, they weren't just dealing with corrupt judges anymore. They were up against the most powerful man in the state. Sirens wailed in the distance as backup finally arrived, but Naomi knew it was too late. The killers were gone, and they'd taken their biggest lead with them. Next day, the morning news played on the office TV, its cheerful tone a stark contrast to the grim reality Naomi and Miguel knew. The anchor's polished voice filled the room. In other news, former prosecutor Peter Langford was tragically killed last night in what police are calling a robbery gone wrong. Langford, who had been living under an assumed name, was reportedly involved in illegal gambling activities. Naomi's coffee cup hit the desk with a sharp crack. Illegal gambling? They're not even trying to make it believable. Miguel stood by the window, his jaw tight as he watched the report. They control the narrative. Local media won't touch anything that might upset their advertisers, especially the private prison companies. The news segment continued, showing carefully selected clips of police officials describing a random act of violence in a high-crime area. No mention of the professional hit team, the automatic weapons, or the fact that Langford had been about to expose corruption at the highest levels of state government. "They're burying it," Naomi said, her voice hard, just like they buried everything else. She turned to the evidence wall they'd constructed, now dominated by a new photo, Governor Charles Montrose. His campaign posters showed a stern-faced man with silver hair and cold eyes, promising tough justice and zero tolerance for crime. Miguel pulled up files on his laptop. Montrose's connection to all this goes back years. Look at this. When he first ran for office, his main platform was expanding the state's prison system. Private prisons, Naomi corrected, scanning the documents. He specifically pushed for private facilities, said they were more cost-effective. The evidence was starting to form a clear picture. Campaign finance records showed massive donations from private prison corporations, all carefully routed through PACs and shell companies. Montrose had used that money to win election after election, each time pushing for harsher sentencing laws. "Here's where it gets interesting," Miguel said, pulling up more files. Every time Montrose passed new sentencing guidelines, Judge Blackwell was put in charge of implementation. They worked together to ensure maximum sentences became the norm, especially for minority defendants. Naomi leaned closer to the screen. The private prisons needed bodies to fill their cells. Montrose provided the laws, Blackwell provided the convictions, and they all got rich off it. She was about to dig deeper when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Mrs. Turner. Her stomach tightened as she answered. "Mrs. Turner, what's wrong?" The woman's voice came through in broken sobs. "They were in our house, Naomi. 2 men. They had guns." Naomi's free hand clenched into a fist. "Are you and Jamal okay?" "We're alive, but..." Mrs. Turner's voice cracked. "They said they'd kill Jamal if you don't stop. They knew everything about him, his school, his schedule. They said no one would ever find his body." The threat hung in the air like poison. Naomi could hear Jamal in the background, trying to comfort his mother. "Listen to me carefully," Naomi said, keeping her voice steady. "Pack a bag, only essentials. Miguel and I will be there in 20 minutes. We're moving you somewhere safe." After hanging up, Naomi slammed her hand against the desk. "They're going after witnesses now, threatening teenagers." Miguel was already grabbing his keys. "They're scared, making mistakes. Going after Jamal proves they're desperate." "They should be scared," Naomi said, checking her weapon. "But threatening a kid? That's their last mistake." As they drove to the Turner's house, Naomi's mind raced. The pieces were all there. Montrose, Blackwell, the private prisons, the corrupt judges. A machine designed to turn poverty and prejudice into profit. But taking down a system this big would require perfect timing. "We can't just go after one piece," she said, watching the city blur past. "If we only get Blackwell, Montrose will replace him. If we only expose the governor, someone else will take over the scheme." Miguel nodded, understanding where she was going. "We need to bring it all down at once. The whole operation." "Exactly. One shot coordinated perfectly. We expose everything simultaneously: the governor's corruption, Blackwell's secret rulings, the prison kickbacks, all of it. Naomi turned to her partner. But if we miss anything, if we make one mistake, they'll bury us, Miguel finished, and everyone we're trying to protect. Naomi looked out at the city, thinking of all the lives destroyed by this corrupt machine. Jamal Turner was just one case among thousands. How many other innocent people had been sacrificed for profit? Then we don't miss, she said firmly. We take them all down. Together. Miguel glanced at her, a determined smile crossing his face. Let's make it count. Later in the dimly lit conference room at the FBI field office, the only light came from the large screen displaying an intricate web of connections. Naomi stood before it, her shadow cast long against the wall as she traced lines between names and dates. Around the table sat her carefully selected team, including Miguel, who was busy organizing stacks of financial records. Look at this pattern, Naomi said, using a laser pointer to highlight specific transactions. Every time Montrose pushed through new sentencing guidelines, there was a corresponding spike in donations to his campaign fund, but they were smart about it, routing everything through shell companies and PACs. Miguel nodded, sliding a folder across the table. And each time, Blackwell's rulings perfectly aligned with whatever the private prison companies needed. If they had empty beds in maximum security, suddenly every case that crossed his bench got upgraded to violent offenses. The evidence was overwhelming yet frustratingly circumstantial. Bank records, voting patterns, case assignments, it all pointed to a massive conspiracy, but nothing concrete enough for federal prosecutors to act on. We need something they can't wiggle out of, said Agent Thompson, one of their senior investigators. Right now, their lawyers could explain away any single piece of this. We need them to make a mistake we can prove. Naomi paced the length of the conference room, her mind racing. Years of experience had taught her that powerful people were often their own worst enemies. Their sense of invulnerability made them careless. What if we gave them a threat they couldn't ignore? Something that would force them to act? Miguel straightened in his chair, catching her drift. A whistleblower. Exactly. Naomi turned to face the team. Not a real one. We create one. Someone supposedly inside their operation with concrete evidence of everything. Make them think their whole world is about to collapse. The room buzzed with energy as the team began to see the possibility. Agent Matthews, their tech specialist, spoke up. We'd need to make it believable. These people are paranoid. They'll check every detail. That's why we need help from someone who knows how to make a story spread, Naomi said, pulling out her phone. Someone who's been trying to expose this corruption for years. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the name, Erica Vale. The investigative journalist had been digging into judicial corruption for years, facing threats and smear campaigns but refusing to back down. If anyone could make this story catch fire, it was her. Erica, Naomi said when the call connected, I need your help with something big. How fast can you get here? An hour later, Erica sat at the conference table, her eyes wide as she absorbed the evidence before her. I knew it was bad, she said. But this is beyond anything I imagined. Naomi laid out their plan. We need to create a story about a whistleblower, someone high up in the governor's office who's ready to talk. The story needs to be specific enough to be credible but vague enough that they can't immediately prove it false. Erica was already taking notes, her journalist's mind working through angles. We'll need documentation, enough real details mixed in to make it impossible to dismiss, and we'll have to move fast. They'll try to kill this story the moment it breaks. The team worked through the night crafting a perfect narrative. They used real dates of meetings between Montrose and prison executives, actual case numbers from Blackwell's court, genuine financial transactions that had raised red flags. Into this framework of truth, they wove their fiction. A senior aide in the governor's office who had been keeping records, someone who had attended the meetings and seen the bribes firsthand. The timing has to be perfect, Miguel said as they finalized the details. Once this hits the news, they'll move quickly to contain it. Erica nodded, reviewing the story one last time. I'll push it out through multiple channels, social media, my blog, and I have contacts at several news stations who trust me. Once it starts spreading, they won't be able to stop it. By morning, the story was ready. Erica made a show of arriving at her office early, making calls that she knew would be monitored. The team had their surveillance in place, cameras watching key locations, phones tapped, movements tracked. The story hit like a bomb. Within hours, it was everywhere. Governor's office implicated in massive judicial corruption scheme, whistleblower claims direct evidence of bribes and cover-ups. Social media exploded with speculation about the unnamed source. News vans gathered outside the state capitol. Naomi and her team monitored everything from their command center. They watched as Montrose's office issued a hasty denial. They tracked Blackwell's sudden cancellation of all his afternoon appointments. And they waited. Just before midnight, their patience was rewarded. A black government sedan with tinted windows pulled up outside the local news station where Erica worked late most nights. The surveillance feed showed two men in dark suits stepping out, both known associates of Judge Blackwell. Naomi's phone buzzed with a text from Erica. "They're here recording everything, get ready." The team watched through multiple camera feeds as the men entered the building. Every word they would say, every threat they would make, every attempt to silence the story. It would all be captured as evidence of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Miguel looked at Naomi, his expression grim but satisfied. "We've got them making a move to silence a witness. Even if the witness is fictional, the attempt is very real." Naomi nodded, watching the feeds intently. This was their proof, the concrete evidence they needed to launch their case. But she knew this was just the opening move in what would become a much larger battle. Meanwhile, the governor's face filled every television screen in the state. Charles Montrose stood behind his official podium, the state flag prominently displayed behind him. His expression was stern, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a seasoned politician. "My fellow citizens," he began, his hands gripping the sides of the podium. "I come to you today with grave concern about the inflammatory and baseless allegations being spread by certain members of the media. These dangerous conspiracy theories threaten the very foundation of our justice system." In her FBI field office, Naomi watched the broadcast, her fingers digging into her palms. The governor's performance was masterful, projecting strength and righteous indignation while carefully avoiding any specific denials. Our judges, our law enforcement officers, our court officials, these dedicated public servants work tirelessly to keep our communities safe, Montrose continued. To suggest that they are part of some vast criminal enterprise is not just false, it's dangerous. It undermines public trust and threatens the stability of our institutions. Miguel stood beside Naomi, shaking his head in disgust. "He's good," he muttered, playing the law and order card while painting us as the threat. On screen, Montrose's voice grew more passionate. "I want to be clear. My administration has zero tolerance for corruption. We investigate every credible allegation. But these recent claims? They're nothing but fiction, created by individuals with political agendas who don't care about the damage they're doing to our state." Naomi's jaw tightened as she watched him weave his web of lies. Every word was carefully chosen to discredit their investigation without directly addressing any specific charges. "I call upon all responsible citizens and media outlets to reject these baseless conspiracy theories," Montrose declared. "Support your local judges. Trust your law enforcement. Together, we will not let these dangerous allegations tear apart the fabric of our justice system." The broadcast ended with Montrose standing tall, projecting an image of unwavering authority. But Naomi could see the subtle signs of strain around his eyes, the slightly too tight grip on the podium, the occasional flicker of tension in his jaw. He was worried. Before she could fully process the implications of Montrose's speech, her office door burst open. Agent Thompson rushed in, his face grave. "Naomi, we've got trouble. Internal Affairs just showed up." 3 stern-faced agents from the Bureau's Internal Affairs Division were already setting up in the conference room. Their team leader, Agent Wilson, approached Naomi with a thick folder. "Agent Brooks," Wilson said, her tone professionally neutral. "We've received some serious allegations about your investigation methods, specifically regarding the evidence used to arrest Judge Crane and your ongoing investigation into Judge Blackwell." Naomi kept her expression calm, though her heart raced. "What allegations?" An anonymous source claims you fabricated evidence, manipulated witnesses, and conducted illegal surveillance operations. Wilson opened the folder. We'll need to review all your case files, interview your team members, and examine every piece of evidence. Miguel stepped forward. This is ridiculous. The timing isn't suspicious to you. Wilson's expression didn't change. We investigate all credible complaints, Agent Soto. You know that. If there's nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about. But Naomi knew better. This wasn't about finding real misconduct. It was about shutting down their investigation. While internal affairs combed through their files, they'd be effectively paralyzed. As if to confirm her fears, her phone buzzed with a text from one of her surveillance team members. All our wiretaps just got pulled. Judge cited procedural irregularities in the warrants. Before she could respond, another crisis hit. Her phone rang. It was one of her agents assigned to protect Jamal Turner and his family. Agent Brooks, the voice was tense. The Turners are gone. Naomi's blood ran cold. What do you mean, gone? Their house is empty. No signs of forced entry, but... The agent hesitated. Their car is still here. We found their phones, wallets, everything they'd need if they were leaving voluntarily. It looks like they were taken. Naomi grabbed her keys, already moving. Secure the scene. Nobody touches anything until I get there. The Turner house was eerily still when Naomi arrived. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze as FBI evidence techs worked methodically through each room. Everything looked normal. No broken windows, no kicked-in doors, no signs of struggle. But that only made it more disturbing. In the kitchen, dishes sat half-washed in the sink. In the living room, a textbook lay open on the coffee table. Jamal had been studying for his GED since his release. Their phones were neatly placed on the charging station. Their wallets sat in a bowl by the door along with their keys. They didn't run, Miguel said, examining the scene. This was planned. Professional. Naomi nodded grimly. They're sending us a message. Back off or the Turners pay the price. She gathered her team back at the office where internal affairs agents were still combing through their files. The timing wasn't a coincidence. While they were tied up defending their investigation, the Turners had been taken. Naomi stood before her team, her voice steady despite her rage. This isn't just corruption anymore. They're committing federal crimes, kidnapping, obstruction, and conspiracy. We end this now. Miguel stepped forward, his expression determined. Then we go after Montrose directly. The team looked at each other, understanding the gravity of what they were proposing. Taking on the governor of the state would be the fight of their lives. But they had no choice. The Turners' lives depended on it. The night air crackled with tension as Naomi adjusted her tactical vest, checking her weapon one final time. Around her, 24 FBI agents and federal marshals prepared for what would be the biggest coordinated raid in the state's history. 3 teams, 3 targets, Judge Blackwell's sprawling estate, Governor Montrose's private residence, and a secret records office where they believed the most damaging evidence was hidden. Miguel approached, his own gear checked and ready. Teams are in position, he reported, his voice low. Just waiting for your signal. Before Naomi could respond, her secure phone buzzed. The message that appeared made her breath catch. They're being held at an abandoned juvenile detention center. You have one chance. No signature, no identifying information. Naomi showed the message to Miguel, who frowned deeply. Could be a trap, he said. Or it could be someone on the inside who's had enough, Naomi countered. The details were too specific to ignore. She pulled up satellite imagery of the old detention center on her tablet. It had been shut down 5 years ago after budget cuts, sitting empty on the outskirts of the city. We can't ignore this, Naomi decided. The Turners could be there, other families too. She turned to the assembled teams. Change of plans. Team 1 and 2 proceed with the raids on Blackwell and Montrose. Team 3 take the records office. Miguel and I will lead a strike team to the detention center. Within minutes, they had reorganized. Naomi and Miguel took 6 of their best tactical agents, loading into 2 unmarked vehicles. As they pulled away from the staging area, Naomi's radio crackled with updates from the other teams moving into position. The abandoned detention center loomed ahead, a hulking shadow against the night sky. Its chain-link fences were rusted, windows dark and empty. But as they approached, their headlights caught fresh tire tracks in the dirt. Multiple vehicles had been here recently. "Contact," one of their agents whispered over the radio. 2 armed guards at the rear entrance. They looked professional. Private security, not police. Naomi and Miguel exchanged glances. This was it. They were in the right place. The team moved silently through the darkness, approaching from multiple angles. Before they could engage, however, the guards suddenly tensed, touching their earpieces. Without warning, they jumped into a parked SUV and sped away. "They're running," Miguel said. "Someone tipped them off." "Or they got new orders," Naomi replied grimly. "Move in. Now." The team breached the building, sweeping through dark corridors with weapons ready. The facility was eerily quiet, their footsteps echoing on concrete floors. Then they heard it, muffled voices coming from what used to be the facility's gymnasium. Naomi's heart pounded as they approached the double doors. On her signal, the team burst in and found exactly what they were looking for. Huddled together on old gym mats were the missing families. Jamal Turner and his mother sat with 3 other families, all looking terrified but alive. They had been zip-tied, but otherwise appeared unharmed. "FBI," Naomi announced, rushing forward as her team secured the room. "Everyone stay calm. We're getting you out of here." The relief on their faces was immediate. Tears streamed down Mrs. Turner's face as Naomi helped her stand, cutting away the plastic restraints. "They were waiting for an order," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They were going to kill us." "You're safe now," Naomi assured her, but her mind was racing. If the guards had been waiting for orders to execute these families, who had called them off? And why? As if in answer to her questions, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Team 1. "Blackwell in custody, evidence secured." Seconds later, another from Team 2. "Montrose arrested. No resistance. Multiple documents seized." A surge of triumph rushed through her. They had done it. The governor and the corrupt judge were both in custody. The evidence they needed would be safe. But before she could even begin to process their success, Miguel's shout cut through the moment. "Incoming!" Brilliant headlights suddenly flooded through the gymnasium's high windows. The sound of engines and screeching tires filled the air. Through the glass, Naomi could see multiple black SUVs positioning themselves around the building, blocking every exit. Armed men in tactical gear began emerging from the vehicles. They moved with military precision, but they weren't wearing any official insignias or police markings. These weren't law enforcement. These were professional mercenaries. "Get the families behind us," Naomi ordered, her team immediately moving into defensive positions. She counted at least 12 hostile forces outside, probably more they couldn't see. Miguel pressed himself against the wall beside a window, peering out carefully. "They're setting up a perimeter. These aren't regular security contractors. They're serious operators." The families huddled together behind a makeshift barricade of old gym equipment, fear evident on their faces. Jamal held his mother close, trying to appear brave despite his trembling hands. Naomi's team took up strategic positions around the gymnasium's entrances. They were outnumbered, but they had the advantage of defendable position, for now. Through the windows, she could see more armed men approaching the building. Their weapons were professional grade, their movements coordinated. These men weren't here to negotiate. They had come to clean up loose ends, permanently. The tension in the abandoned detention center was suffocating. Naomi's tactical team had secured the gymnasium, but now they were trapped inside. Through the high windows, harsh spotlights from the surrounding SUVs cast long shadows across the dusty floor. The rescued families huddled behind a makeshift barricade of old gym equipment, their faces etched with fear. Miguel pressed his back against the wall, carefully peering through a gap in the window. His expression darkened as he assessed their situation. "These aren't regular contractors," he muttered to Naomi. "Look at their gear, their formation. This is Montrose's personal hit squad." Naomi tightened her grip on her weapon, her mind racing through their limited options. Her team consisted of just 6 agents, all highly trained, but severely outnumbered. She caught glimpses of the armed men taking positions outside. Their movements were precise, professional. They carried military-grade weapons and wore unmarked tactical gear. "Form a defensive perimeter," Naomi ordered her team, her voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. "Priority is protecting the civilians." The FBI agents moved swiftly, taking up strategic positions around the gymnasium's entrances. Mrs. Turner clutched Jamal close to her chest, trying to shield him, even though he was nearly as tall as she was. The other families, 3 in total, pressed together, some praying quietly, others fighting back tears. They had just been rescued from one nightmare only to find themselves in another. The night air crackled with tension. Then, through the loudspeaker of one of the SUVs, a voice boomed across the empty grounds. "Agent Brooks." The voice was calm, almost casual. "We don't want bloodshed. Hand over the witnesses. Walk away and this ends here." Naomi exchanged glances with Miguel. "They're trying to clean up loose ends," she said quietly. "Make sure there are no witnesses left to testify against Montrose." She reached for her radio, pressing the transmit button. "Command, this is Brooks. We need immediate extraction. Multiple hostile forces surrounding our position. Civilians at risk. Over." The response from FBI headquarters crackled through her earpiece, making her heart sink. "Copy that, Brooks. Nearest tactical support is 20 minutes out. Hold position." 20 minutes? Miguel whispered harshly. "We won't last 5 against these numbers." Outside, the armed men began to advance, moving in a coordinated pattern that spoke of military training. They were closing the distance to the building, using vehicles and terrain for cover. Naomi knew they were out of time. These men weren't here to negotiate or take prisoners. They had orders to eliminate everyone inside, federal agents included. Her jaw set with determination as she made her decision. "Hold the line," she commanded, her voice carrying to each member of her team. "We protect these families at all costs." The first shot came from outside, a warning round that shattered one of the high windows, sending glass raining down. Naomi's team responded immediately, returning precise fire through windows and doorways. The gymnasium erupted into chaos as gunfire exploded from all directions. Miguel dropped to one knee, taking careful aim through a broken window. His shot found its mark, and one of the advancing attackers fell. Naomi moved between positions, directing her team's fire while picking off targets of her own. Her training kicked in, muscle memory taking over as she acquired and engaged threats with mechanical precision. The firefight was intense but controlled. Though outnumbered, the FBI agents were better trained, more disciplined. They made every shot count, forcing the attackers to move more cautiously, buying precious seconds. Behind them, the families stayed low, covering their ears against the deafening exchange of gunfire. Jamal Turner had pulled his mother down, shielding her with his own body. The other families were pressed flat against the floor, trying to make themselves as small as possible. Minutes stretched like hours. 2 of Naomi's agents were hit. Nothing fatal, but their defensive line was weakening. The attackers were pressing their advantage, moving closer to the building. Through her radio, Naomi could hear the other teams reporting their success in arresting Montrose and Blackwell, but that victory seemed distant now. Just when it seemed they would be overrun, a new sound cut through the gunfire, sirens growing louder by the second. Multiple sirens coming from all directions. Suddenly, brilliant white light flooded the area as helicopter spotlights swept across the grounds. The sound of rotors filled the air as FBI tactical helicopters appeared overhead. Through the windows, Naomi could see dozens of FBI vehicles and federal marshal units converging on the scene, their emergency lights painting the night in red and blue. The effect on the attackers was immediate. Their coordinated assault dissolved into chaos. Some dropped their weapons immediately, falling to their knees with hands raised. Others broke ranks and ran for their vehicles. The black SUVs that had trapped them began peeling away, tires screeching as they sought escape routes. "Federal agents!" New voices boomed through multiple loudspeakers. "Drop your weapons! You are surrounded!" Naomi kept her team in position until she was certain the threat had passed. Through her window, she watched as federal agents swarmed the area, taking the remaining attackers into custody. the night air filled with shouts of "clear" as the perimeter was secured. Only then did she lower her weapon, letting out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her team had survived, battered and exhausted, but alive. The families were safe. She reached for her radio one final time. "Command, this is Brooks," she transmitted, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. "Tell Washington, Montrose just declared war on the federal government." Days later, the insistent pounding on his front door jolted Governor Charles Montrose from his sleep. He blinked at the bedside clock. 5 a.m. glowed in harsh red digits. For a moment, he lay there in his silk pajamas, trying to process the sound. Nobody would dare disturb him at this hour. Nobody except... His stomach dropped as realization hit. He scrambled out of bed, his usual composed demeanor cracking. The pounding continued, accompanied now by authoritative voices. "Governor Montrose, FBI, open the door!" His private security team should have prevented this. Where were they? He grabbed his phone. No signal. Of course. They'd already cut his communications. Montrose straightened his shoulders, trying to gather his dignity as he descended the marble staircase of his mansion. He was the governor, after all. They couldn't just... He pulled open the heavy oak door and his breath caught in his throat. There stood Agent Naomi Brooks, her FBI badge raised, flanked by a dozen tactical agents in full gear. "Charles Montrose," she said, her voice clear and steady. "You're under arrest." The governor's face reddened. "Do you have any idea who I am? You can't just..." "We can and we are," Naomi cut him off, nodding to her team. Two agents stepped forward with handcuffs. "We have federal warrants for your arrest on multiple charges. You can come quietly, or we can do this the hard way." Montrose's eyes darted around, searching for an escape route, but FBI agents had already secured the perimeter of his property. His security team was nowhere in sight, probably already in custody. As the agents cuffed him, Naomi read him his rights. "You're being charged with racketeering, bribery, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and ordering illegal detentions. You have the right to remain silent." The governor's world crumbled around him as he was led out of his mansion. News vans were already arriving, their lights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Cameras flashed like lightning, capturing the moment the most powerful man in the state was brought low. Across town, another drama was unfolding. Judge Emery Blackwell had almost made it. His private jet was fueled and waiting on the tarmac, ready to whisk him away to the Cayman Islands. But as he approached the plane's stairs, FBI vehicles surrounded him on all sides. "Going somewhere, Your Honor?" Miguel Soto stepped out of one of the vehicles, his badge gleaming. Blackwell's carefully maintained facade of judicial dignity shattered. He tried to run but made it only 3 steps before agents tackled him to the ground. By noon, the operation was in full swing. FBI teams moved systematically through the state's power structure, arresting every official connected to the corruption scheme. Prosecutors who had taken bribes, administrators who had falsified records, prison executives who had profited from wrongful convictions. None were spared. The media coverage was relentless. Every major network carried live footage of Montrose being processed at the federal courthouse. The governor's perfectly tailored suit was replaced with an orange jumpsuit, his manicured hands bound in chains. Reporters swarmed outside the courthouse, their questions overlapping in a cacophony of voices. But one cut through the rest. "Agent Brooks. Agent Brooks. How does it feel to take down the most powerful man in the state?" Naomi stood at the courthouse steps, surrounded by her team. Behind her were the families whose lives had been torn apart by the corrupt system, including Jamal Turner and his mother. Their presence was a powerful reminder of why this fight had been necessary. She looked directly into the cameras, her voice firm and clear. "This isn't about power," she said. "It's about justice." The words resonated across live broadcasts throughout the state. In holding cells and interrogation rooms, the arrested officials watched on mounted TVs as their empire crumbled. Montrose's face was ashen as he saw his own booking photo displayed on every channel. Later that night, after the media frenzy had died down, Naomi stood alone on the rooftop of the FBI field office. The city stretched out before her, its lights twinkling in the darkness. The same buildings, the same streets, but something fundamental had changed today. She heard footsteps behind her and didn't need to turn to know it was Miguel. He joined her at the railing, both of them taking in the view in comfortable silence. "You did it," he said finally. Naomi exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the day, of the entire investigation, settling around her shoulders. "We did it," she corrected him. "But there are more like them, and they'll try again." Miguel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then we'll be ready." The autumn sun painted golden streaks across the courthouse steps as Jamal Turner emerged, a free man at last. His mother, Kara, rushed forward, wrapping him in an embrace that seemed to make up for all the months they'd lost. Tears streamed down her face as she held her son, her shoulders shaking with relief and joy. "My baby," she whispered, pulling back to look at him. "My baby boy is really free." Jamal's own eyes glistened as he hugged his mother tighter. The weight of wrongful imprisonment, the fear and uncertainty that had haunted him for months, finally lifted from his shoulders. He stood taller now, dressed in a crisp blue suit that replaced the prison jumpsuit he'd been forced to wear. From a respectful distance, Naomi Brooks watched the reunion, a warm smile spreading across her face. This was why she fought so hard. This moment, seeing an innocent person walk free, seeing a family reunited, made every dangerous encounter, every threat, every sleepless night worth it. The media gathered around the courthouse steps, their cameras capturing the emotional scene. But unlike the hostile coverage that had surrounded Jamal's original trial, these reporters told a different story. They spoke of justice restored, of corruption exposed, of a system being cleaned up one case at a time. "Mr. Turner," one reporter called out, "how does it feel to be exonerated?" Jamal turned, his mother's arm still around his shoulders. He spoke with a quiet dignity that moved everyone present. "It feels like breathing again," he said, "like waking up from a nightmare." His eyes found Naomi in the crowd, and he nodded to her, a gesture full of gratitude and respect. She nodded back, remembering the scared teenager she'd first met in Crane's courtroom. That boy was gone. In his place stood a young man who had faced injustice and emerged stronger. Kara Turner broke away from her son and walked over to Naomi, pulling her into an unexpected hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Naomi returned the embrace, her professional demeanor softening for a moment. "You never gave up either," she reminded Kara. "That's what matters." The crowd began to disperse as Jamal and his mother left to begin their new life. Naomi watched them go, knowing that while this chapter was closing, the larger story was far from over. 2 days later, Naomi stood in the FBI headquarters, facing Director Thompson and a panel of senior officials. The room was formal, all dark wood and serious faces, but there was an energy of purpose in the air. "Agent Brooks," Director Thompson began, "what you uncovered with the Montrose case goes beyond one corrupt governor or one crooked judge. You exposed a systematic problem that demands a systematic response." He slid a folder across the polished table. "We're creating a specialized task force dedicated to investigating judicial corruption across the country. We need someone who understands the scope of the problem, someone who isn't afraid to take on powerful enemies." Naomi picked up the folder, already knowing what it contained. "You want me to lead it?" "You've proven you have the skills and the determination," Thompson continued. "This won't be easy. The corruption you exposed in one state exists in others. There are more Judge Cranes out there, more Governor Montroses." "Good," Naomi said firmly. "Then let's find them." The director smiled slightly. "I had a feeling you'd say that. Your office is already being prepared." An hour later, Naomi walked into her new workspace. It was larger than her old office, with windows overlooking the city. A team of analysts and investigators would work under her direction, all dedicated to rooting out corruption in the justice system. As she set her bag down, she noticed a thick file waiting on her desk. Opening it, she found details of suspicious patterns in another state's judicial system. A judge with an unusually high conviction rate for minority defendants. Mysterious financial transactions. witnesses who changed their testimony under unclear circumstances. The same familiar web of corruption, just with different players. Naomi smiled, already feeling the familiar fire of determination building inside her. This was why she joined the FBI in the first place, not just to solve individual cases, but to change the system itself. She pressed the intercom button on her desk. "Could you send in the team?" she asked her new assistant. Minutes later, a group of carefully selected agents filed in. They were young and eager, chosen for their skills and their unwavering commitment to justice. They looked at Naomi with respect and anticipation, ready to learn from the agent who had brought down a governor. "Welcome to the Judicial Integrity Task Force," Naomi said, holding up the file. "We have work to do." The next morning found Naomi walking up the steps of yet another courthouse, her badge secure in its holder. The rising sun cast long shadows behind her, but she moved forward with purpose and determination. Her new team flanked her, each carrying files and equipment for the investigation ahead. The heavy doors opened before her, and she stepped into the marble hallway with confident strides. Lawyers and court officials glanced her way, some with curiosity, others with unease. Word had spread about the new FBI task force, about the agent who had exposed corruption at the highest levels. Naomi felt the weight of her badge, the symbol of authority and responsibility it represented. Another battle lay ahead, another fight for justice. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had a team behind her, resources at her disposal, and the full backing of the FBI. She was ready. If you enjoyed the story of Naomi's fight for justice, I handpicked this next story that you will love. If you enjoyed the story of Naomi's fight for justice, I handpicked this next story that you will love. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.